Did I ever tell you the joke about the cab driver and the rabbi? No, come on. Okay, all right. So here's the joke. Cab driver and a rabbi both show up to heaven at the same time. Just happened that they both show up. So the cab driver, he came right before, so he's first online. So the ministering angels, whatever it looks like up there, they open up his file and they very quickly determine Mr. Cab Driver, straight to heaven. So all right, he takes his stuff and goes straight to heaven. And the rabbi shows up, they open up his file and they start ecking and becking and this, we're not sure, we're not that. And the rabbi gets so offended. He says, this cab driver, this low-life nobody, you send straight to heaven. And me, I'm a rabbi, and also you're not sure, you're this and that. So they say, listen, this is what we know. Whenever anyone got into his cab, they right away started praying. You, whenever you open up your mouth, everybody started sleeping. I don't know. It's that's just what we got. I never told it to you.
It's good.
I don't know if you were the source.
Yeah, it's definitely part of the repertoire. Okay.
It makes the rounds. Huh?
Exactly. Listen, this is it's part of the art. You gotta have jokes, or else. Okay, or else you fall asleep. Exactly. Jokes are very important. What?
No, I said I was fall asleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Good evening. Jewish law course. You know, it's interesting. Simply from experience, we don't do Jewish law courses that often for one reason. They don't sell well. It's interesting. People hear Jewish law, they're like, you know what? It just doesn't talk to me. It's this, just, you know, I kind of get it. When was the last time you went into the airport or the subway and someone's sitting reading just some legal text? Or it's no one does that. If you see somebody reading law, what would you say? Oh, you're studying for your exam for the bar? So if you're a lawyer and you need to do it, you study law. So it is an interesting thing, and I actually give you all credit for joining this course. We have a lot of people. We have 17 people here on Zoom, which is great. And really it's more, because there's some of the frames have 2 people in there. So hello everyone. And I'm actually honored that you all accepted the offer to come to this course, and I got to tell you, it's beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. And I look forward to studying with you over the next 6 weeks, God willing, in person, on Zoom. Okay. And by the way, I should actually mention, if any of you are lawyers and have a degree in other states, are you licensed in other states? If you're licensed in any other states, this course is accredited. So that's just, in Michigan, lawyers don't need accreditation, right? No continuing education. Which means that even though this course is accredited, it doesn't help for Michigan. But in other states, even if you live here, but if you have a license in California, in Chicago, whatever, this course will get you accredited. Okay, I have a question for you. What do you get for it? 9 credits. That's how it works. 9 continuing legal continuing education credits. CLEs, continuing legal education. Which I guess is very valuable. And I think it also has ethical credits. You have to get some ethical credits. It covers all that good stuff. I have a question for you. And I think this is a good way to kind of ease our way into this course. Okay, I'm a yeshiva graduate, right? Which means I didn't go to college. I went to, the fancy way to say is rabbinical college, but no, we went to yeshiva, right? It's good old yeshiva. Already from the age of 13. I came here to Detroit, here on 9 Mile, at the age of 13. And the schedule is from 7:30 a.m. to 9 o'clock or 9:30 p.m. It's a long day. Of course, there's breaks, but yeshiva days are just, you know, it's just full on, you know, it's what are we doing the whole day? What topics do you think are the priority? What are we learning about? Just like, not only what books, but what topics? Well, go ahead.
Can I back you up one bit?
Of course.
Princeton, New Jersey?
Princeton, yes.
How did you end up at yeshiva here in Detroit?
That's a good question. Okay, so if I'm a Jersey boy, there's a lot of yeshivas in New York and New Jersey. What am I doing in Michigan to go to yeshiva? So my father was a very good father. And he didn't just say, what's the closest yeshiva? Listen, he researched into to all the yeshivas, and he wanted to find a good yeshiva. He came to the conclusion that Detroit is the best yeshiva, and he's right. He is right. It's a very special yeshiva. Yeah, he made the right choice. Detroit definitely was the right place. So 13, and I was a little bit homesick when I first came here, but it's okay. I survived. I'm here, All right. Okay. So what do you think? Like, so what are you studying a whole day? What topics do you think is important for a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, 16, 17? The whole day. So what topics are we covering? What do you say? Feel on Zoom as well. Feel free to unmute. In person, you could also unmute. Good job. You unmuted. So you could unmute. What do you say? Life. What about life? Important stuff? No, I'm thinking it's.
Well, Torah, you would
So,
study.
no, so of course Torah, but Torah means everything. There's hundreds of thousands of volumes of Torah. Talmudic law. So what does that mean, Talmudic law? Like what type of law? Like what type of topics? Ethical. Okay, ethical Talmud law.
Looking at the world through a Jewish prism, a prism that is informed by the Talmudists and much of what's in the Tanakh, I think.
So getting a view of life through Judaism.
Inculcated in that kind of perspective, to look at things that way.
Right, so but like what specific topics?
Topics are, I would say, epistemology and cosmology are principally, I think you guys focus on.
All right. Epistemology and cosmology.
How we know what we know.
Right.
And what can we know, what don't we know, and where did this all come from?
It's like the basics of belief.
Origins of basically.
Okay, very good. What else? Any other suggestions? What do you think? What do you think I learned when I was 13 years old in yeshiva?
Hebrew.
How to live.
Hebrew? Okay.
No, I think he knew that.
Yeah, you more or less. I for sure knew how to read, and I had a 13-year-old understanding of the Hebrew language. And of course, as you learn more, you learn more. But it wasn't learning Hebrew wasn't really a subject. It wasn't like we had an hour class on Hebrew. Any more learning of Hebrew came simply by studying and more experience.
How to live together in a righteous and fair way.
How to live together in a righteous and fair way. So I want to tell you the answer. And the answer, hey Max, come on in. You got a book. Okay, very good. All right, take the only chair. You're in the splash zone. You went to the wrong place?
I went to your house.
Oh, okay.
Before too.
Mendel was very helpful.
Okay.
Was it directions?
But you're here. All right. So I'll tell you, what we do a whole day in yeshiva, the primary subject is Talmud. That's the book. But what in Talmud? We're not studying, primarily in yeshiva, so you're not really studying ritual law, religious law, how to keep Shabbos, the holidays, and the prayer, and all your obligations to God. The tractates of Talmud that you study in yeshiva are very much about civil law, criminal law, and by the time you reach the age of 16, 17, you're studying Talmud 6 hours a day. 6 hours a day. So you could be spending hours and hours and hours talking about cases like if your cow gored another cow, and if a fire started on your property and it burned your neighbor's field, and if you're a store owner and somebody is traveling and something in their wagon catches fire from a flame inside your shop. And it's not just case law. It's, there's a lot of debates and deliberations and trying to understand the logic and a lot. If you think about it, it's a little bit crazy. Hours and hours on what? On these cases which are archaic. They're very olden day. It's not like we're talking about a case that's going to happen to you tomorrow. Like chances are this going to be happening to you tomorrow. It is like such. So what's this all about? Are we just doing it just because we're Jews? We study Talmud, so we just study it. Or so if you think about it, it is a weird thing. It doesn't come across. I'll put it this way: it doesn't come across as naturally useful information. Like, we're going to spend 6 hours teaching you the truths of life. No, he's like hours and hours, days and days on like these cases that for a fact you're never gonna bump into such a case in your life. How do I make sense of that? What's that all about? What do you say? Yeah. What do you say?
Moral obligations.
You're learning moral obligations?
I think
You
you're
had
learning
a
how to learn and how to think about
Oh.
unique situations so you can pick them up and apply them to other things. Maybe more contemporary things, maybe things you're more likely to bump up against in 2022 or what have you. So the idea here being that you're sort of stretching your brain and getting around all the different ways you can look at a situation. It's almost as though, you know, if your wagon catches fire from a spark from a shop that you passed is only the vehicle to sort of talk about strange circumstances and things that could happen.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying two different ideas,
Go ahead.
right? Point number one, I'll tell you, there's a good story. Could be some of you have heard about him. He passed away maybe a year ago, 2 years ago. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. Rabbi Adin Evan Israel Steinsaltz. Unbelievable scholar. Literally, he's not, unbelievable scholar. And somebody once asked him, what's up with you studying Talmud? You're learning about cows? You're ridiculous. What are you learning about cows? So Rabbi Steinsaltz, who was an unbelievably sharp guy, he says, if you think that when we're studying Talmud, we're talking about cows, then you're the cow. What did he mean? He meant, we're trying to build legal principles and we're using the cow as an example. It could be a car, it could be anything, right? But it's we're learning logic, we're learning, and then something else, which I'm not sure if you meant this also, but this is like one of the first things when anybody says you learn Talmud, what do you gain? Critical thinking. Oh, you're learning how to think, you're learning how to be a Talmudic scholar. It doesn't mean that you know how to apply the law in this case, that case. It means that you have a way of looking at cases and you understand nuance, like the Jewish thing goes on the one hand, on the other hand, right? That's a very Jewish thing. We know how to look at things and we understand that it's multifaceted, it's more complex. In today's dialogue, everything's always very, very simple. It's very simplistic, right? Black and white, right? Republican or Democrat, right? Everything's, there's not a lot of sense of nuance today in the public dialogue. In Judaism and Talmud, everything is so nuanced, you could always pick it apart and everything. So that's good, but I don't think that really answers why we would spend 6 hours a day, every single day of the week, besides Shabbos, Shabbos, different schedule, just simply studying this stuff again and again and again. And this is really the question of this course. Why study Jewish law? And as I mentioned, will you ever go to an airport or on a subway and you'll see an American citizen just reading a book of law, reading American law, reading the Constitution? How many Americans, by the way, read the whole Constitution? You I know, and you also I know. That's my point. Besides lawyers, when we see somebody studying American law, we assume you're a lawyer. Of course you're. Meaning, why else? The way it is in American law is that if you have a question, what do? You ask a lawyer. I don't need to know law. In Judaism, there's this culture. Every Jew learns Jewish law. Every Jew studies Talmud. Every Jew has to know this stuff. And why? Why are we doing this here? So I want to leave that question open-ended. And I want to talk a little bit about law. There's American law, there's secular law, or Western law, there's Jewish law. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of law systems. What's secular law? So let me ask you a question. Why law? Why does anybody need law? Why in America do we have laws? Who decided we need laws? Maybe we shouldn't have laws. It's a foolish question. But what's the answer? What's the point of law?
Gotta learn to behave.
To help you behave. Or in other words, if we didn't have law, then what would happen?
Anarchy.
There'd be anarchy. People wouldn't be able to live. There'd be a lot of chaos and friction between people. Or in other words, the Western understanding of law in the modern world is to protect people's rights. Protect people's rights. So let's read that over here, right? Let's read that. We're meeting with our first text for tonight. In your books. By the way, does everybody here have books? This is from the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which was a very important document for the French Revolution in the year, it says over here, 1789. And page 4. Page 4 in your books. And this will give us an understanding of what is the purpose of law, what is law looking to achieve within our Western and what I would call secular law. And, secular versus religious, and not religious, but Jewish law. Okay, let's begin. You want to begin, Toby, with reading? Okay, and those of you here on Zoom, hopefully you'll be able to hear the microphone pick it up. But if not, you'll know where we're holding. Page 4, text 1. Keep turning the pages after, there you go. Okay, text 1, go for it.
Liberty consists in the freedom to do everything which injures no one else. Hence, the exercise of the natural rights of each man has no limit, except those which assure to the other members of society the enjoyment of the same rights. These limits can only be determined by law. Law can only prohibit such actions as are hurtful to society. Nothing may be prevented which is not forbidden by law, and no one may be forced to do anything not provided for by law.
Okay. So what does this mean? The point of a government, the point of a government creating law is very, very simple. We want every single human being to be able to exercise their full freedoms, rights, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The only problem is, as right as you said, if everybody is exercising their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness to the fullest extent, there's going to be a clash between your rights and my rights. That's what we call anarchy. So the laws, the government is there to figure out what do we need to prohibit, what do we need to limit, so like that you will not be infringing upon somebody else's rights. A very, very simple concept. As the saying goes, your right to swing your fist ends at my nose. You could swing your fist as much as you want. The second gets to my nose, your right ends. That's really the secular understanding of what law is. And more or less, and of course, this is to overly simplify it, but this is the way it works. American law is based on rights. What is within your rights, what's not within your rights. And why is it not within your rights? Because you're infringing upon somebody else's rights. You're hurting society. That's the way it works. And that's pretty straightforward, right? What about Judaism? It's very interesting. Jewish law is not just religious law. So of course, in Judaism, the open book of Jewish law, the code of Jewish law will tell you how to keep Shabbos, will tell you how to pray, and it will tell you the different rituals and all that good stuff. But then Judaism is gives you an entire system of civil law. Civil law means interpersonal relationships, neighbors, business, money, disputes, damages, criminal law, everything. And in fact, it's very, very interesting. The very first thing that Moses taught the Jews after the giving of the 10 Commandments was not religious law, it was civil law. Which makes us wonder, why does Judaism need to give us a civil law? I'm not a professional, but I don't think Christianity has Christian civil law, right? Anybody? I'm pretty sure. There's no.
There may be some aspects of it, but
Maybe some aspects. I'm not sure. The real truth is,
I don't think it's a complete program.
it's not a complete program. So maybe you'll have some ideas there. What was that?
I mean, Steve is talking about the rule over
Okay,
there.
right. So you have values. You have Christian values.
No, but
I'm not talking about values, I'm talking about law.
Rules like don't lend on interest, that kind of thing.
So you do have some.
There were some civil laws.
You do have some. You say we won't have a full, complete package
No.
of how to deal with complex business disputes and things like that. Okay, Judaism and God gives us this very, very, very involved set of laws. So first of all, why do we even need that? Why can't God say, you know what, I'm telling you how to be Jewish. And when it comes to behaving between yourselves, you guys are smart people. Or you could just follow the law of the land, or if you're in Israel, you'll figure it out on your own. Human beings, for the most part, have been pretty capable, trial and error, but it was never too perfect. But more or less, you figure out how to make civil laws that make a healthy society. Why do we need Judaism to give us civil law? Why, or to put it differently, you go ahead.
Maybe we need civil law to give us Judaism.
Ooh, that's deep.
It's the inverse.
That's
Would we be Jewish without?
the question implies the answer. Would we even know Judaism without civil law? Or in other words, what is Jewish about Jewish civil law? Is it just another version of law? Like God said, you know what? There's American law, there's Polish law, right? From the Jews live in. I'm saying every society makes, and I'll give you my version of law. And probably God got a little bit better than everybody else. That's the assumption. But what makes it, or to your point, what makes law distinctly Jewish? Jewish civil law. So what makes it Jewish? So let's read the answer. And the sages, the commentators speak about this. So what's Jewish? There's an entire Torah portion. It's an entire Torah portion. It's a Torah portion that comes right after the giving of the Torah. Parsha Mishpatim. Was that your bar mitzvah parsha, anybody? And it's it's not storytelling, it's just verses and verses of law. You could read that entire Torah portion, and more or less, there's nothing religious there. There's nothing religious here. So what makes us Jewish? Here's the answers. So let's read text 2. You want to read, Steve? Text 2, page 5.
Oh, yeah. Every human society requires laws. What is the advantage of God's Torah laws over the legal system set up by other nations? Why does the verse state that these are the laws you shall set before them, thereby telling us that these laws are a unique divine system exclusively given to us by God? The reason for this is that the divine laws contain elements absent from other legal systems. God's laws are based on the principles of compassion and goodness.
Oh, so this text from the Abarbanel, look at this. There's 2 ideas I want you to see here. Number 1, he says, there's a lot in the divine laws that is absent in other legal systems. And we're going to see that throughout this course. Judaism has a lot to say about different cases, different scenarios. And if you look in American law, there's nothing there about it. That's point 1. Point 2, which is really the other side of the coin of the same idea, is that God's laws are based on compassion and goodness. American law, there's definitely a sense of righteousness, justiceness, but it's not compassionate or good. And as we learn more, we'll understand what that means. But Judaism is compassion. It's a whole different model of law. The Rebbe would always say this: the Torah is not just a Torah that we need to follow, it's Torah's chesed. It's a Torah of kindness. Everything the Torah teaches us and instructs us to do is all kindness. And this really is based on one verse in the Torah. And this is a very important verse. We're going to be getting back to this verse later on in today's class as well. Let's read text 3, a verse from Deuteronomy. Stuart, page 6.
Right and good. Diligently observe God's commandments that he has commanded you. Do what is right and good in God's eyes.
There we have it. Diligently observe God's commandments. And what does the verse say right away? Do what is right and good in God's eyes. Right, righteous, and good. Yashar and Tov are the Hebrew words. Yashar doesn't just mean righteous, it means to be straight. Be a straight person. So how do we kind of define the difference between secular law and Jewish law? So here's the way I want to explain it to you, which is actually it's a very nice idea, I think. What's the difference between a referee and a coach? A referee, he's impartial. A referee has only one concern. Everybody playing fairly.
Yeah.
No one's taking advantage over anybody else. No one's cheating. No one's finding an unfair advantage. As long as that's happening, as long as the game rules are being followed, the referee's happy and he has no other concern. Sportsmanship, strategy, energy, that's totally out of the purview of the referee, right? Okay, a coach for the team, he cares about the rules as well.
He cares about the person.
Oh, but he doesn't just say, I want you to comply with the rules. No, he's trying to guide you. He's teaching game tactics. He's trying to encourage the team to excel. He doesn't just want people who are in compliance. He wants team members who are going to excel, bring out the best, work the hardest.
Play to the edge of the rules.
Play to the edge of the rules. Okay, that's which means throw yourself into the game. It's a whole different. He's trying to get the best out of his players. That's what a coach is. So a referee is regulating the game. A coach is going much further. He's going for success. He's trying to go for excellence. It's very, very different. So this is what I want to do. Let's use this model, referee and coach, and we'll use this. Secular law is like a referee. Secular law is there to regulate society, to keep within the rules. Every human being is to keep within rules. It's like that there could be a society where nobody's rights are being trampled upon. That's what secular law is worried about. Jewish law, it's a whole different understanding. Jewish law is about guiding society, not regulating society, guiding society for excellence, for goodness.
I don't know.
It's a very, very different model. Let's put this up over here. Secular law is about protecting rights. Judaism is about doing right. Whenever there's any situation and you bring it to American court, the perspective of American law is this within your rights? Are anybody's rights being heard over here? That's always a question. In Judaism, the question always is, what is the right thing to do? I don't want to know what's within your rights, what's not within your rights. What is the right choice? It's very, very different. And for that reason, we see that in American law, there's law, and then there's ethical conduct, moral conduct. And law doesn't teach you morality. American law doesn't teach you morality. It's not law's job. Now, yeah, of course, there's a lot of ethical considerations in American law. But at the end of the day, when it's about something that's within your rights, law doesn't tell you what to do. You do whatever you want. It's your business. What you do within your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is none of American law's business. And in that sense, you have two totally separate things. You have law and you have ethics. Law is the government's job. Ethics is your business. In Judaism, they're very intertwined. You cannot divorce Jewish values from Jewish law. It's one and the same. Because Jewish law is coaching you, right? The Torah is not a rule book. The Torah is a playbook. And God is the coach. And God is there teaching you not just how to keep within the rules. God is not just there saying, I want to keep you guys off each other's necks. God is trying to bring out the best within us. God is trying to develop a society, to create a world where over generations we bring out the best within people. So really, and this gets back to your point, without studying Jewish civil law, you're missing out on Jewish values. You don't just study a Jewish civil law to know what the law is. By the way, even if you study Talmud for a lifetime, chances are you'll still need to reach out to a professional rabbi who does this for a living to find out what the law is when you're actually stuck in a bind. Which means when you study Talmud, it's not necessarily all about knowing what the law is going to be conclusively. And by the way, in every single one of these classes, we're going to learn about laws, we're going to learn about principles of law, but you're going to see that I don't think we're going to be, closed book, we know the law. We're going to be introduced to a concept of law. So why are we studying it? Because you start seeing how to think Jewish. How does God think about righteousness? How does God think about good choices? God is teaching you. When you study Talmud, when you study Jewish law, you're studying principles of life. God is coaching you. And it changes who you are. It makes the better people. And I think we're going to see that. And I'll just tell you that this is part of the agenda of this course. Every single one of these lessons is going to introduce us to a Jewish value or a Jewish principle in Jewish law that absolutely challenges, I think, conventional wisdom. So every single one of these classes is going to be forcing us to think differently about issues. And, we're all Americans, we're all Westerners, so we all think about things very naturally within one prism, within one perspective. And then also you start learning the Jewish perspective, and it starts challenging the way we think. And that's good. That's where you see the magic happening of Jewish civil law helping guide us, coaching us to be the best we could be. And this answers our question. In secular law, there's no need to study secular law. You have a question, you ask your lawyer, you get billed, right? You know the joke. There's once a doctor. Do you know this one?
I don't know if I know this one. I know a good one.
Could be it's this one. Okay, there's a doctor, Shabbos and Shul. Every Shabbos he goes to synagogue, goes to Shul. And the whole community's health issues, and every toothache, and every toenail, the whole community's problems, people line up to ask Dr. Goldstein some medical advice. And he's coming to pray, he's coming for 2 hours to pray. And all of a sudden it turns into 2 hours of medical consultation. It's trying to drive him a little bit crazy. So he goes, there's a lawyer sitting in shul, right, of course, a synagogue, there's a lawyer and a doctor, of course. He goes to the lawyer. He says, I don't know what to do. I can't daven. Everybody's driving me crazy. Medical questions. So the lawyer says, look, I'll tell you. I used to have this problem. That's what I started doing. I don't mind it anymore. Now, anybody who comes over to me, asks me for legal advice on Shabbos. Monday morning, I send them the bill in the mail. So the doctor said, "Gee, that's genius. I'm going to start doing that as well." And the lawyer said, "No problem, pleasure." And Monday morning, the doctor got the bill in the mail. So in American society, in Western society, Western culture, nobody studies law. Lawyers study law. If you have a question, you hire a lawyer, and they'll consult you in how to be in compliance with the law. And in Jewish law, there's this very weird thing. Everybody has to learn law. Everybody has to study. Nobody could say, "I'll let the rabbi study Talmud. If I have a question, I'll ask." No. Every Jew has to study. Right? Every Jew has to take this course. That's the truth. Every Jew has to take this course. But why? Because it's not just a set of laws to be in compliance with. This is the key idea. God is teaching us how to think Jewish, how to think righteously, how to be good people. God is teaching us a value system. And the more we study it and the more we discuss it and we get down to the underlying principles that drive Jewish law, we're getting in touch with what it really means to be a Jew, what it means to think like a Jew, what are the attitudes of being Jewish. And we're letting God train us like a coach. But that happens when we study Jewish civil law. So this is not just civil law. This is not just a class for lawyers. This is really a class which is, all these classes are very important for Jewish life. I'll just tell you, I remember the first time I started studying Talmud, I was, I think, 9 years old, 10 years old, maybe 11. Probably actually 11. 11 years old, studied Talmud. And I still remember what we were learning. And it's going to cover some of the topics we're studying today. Disputes between neighbors. It was like all these nuanced cases of two neighbors that share a wall, or a neighbor on the top floor and the bottom floor, and this and that. I remember one of the cases. This is what I remember. I was 11 or 12. Your house collapses. You own the bottom floor. Somebody else owned the top floor. There's a dispute who owns the rocks of the house, because the rocks are a commodity. A whole case about rocks of a fallen house. It's amazing that 11-year-old kid is studying this in school. Like, what are you doing? This is what you need to teach. You're not learning about rocks. You're not learning about houses. You're learning values. You're learning attitudes in life. You're learning about when there's an argument, how do you think? What's righteous? What's goodness? And this text, which is actually a Hasidic text, captures, I think, so poetically even, so beautifully, this concept. Let's read text 4. Want to go for it?
Oh, sure.
All right.
Two types of laws. Laws that create life, laws created by life. Human laws are created by life. God's Torah is a divine law that creates life.
All right. There are laws that create life, laws created by life. I want to put this up here on the screen. Secular law is created by life, right? Which means as society continues to develop, and whenever our lawmakers see that there's an issue which needs to be addressed, we legislate laws created by life. Life happens. Whenever we see a need, we address it, we make laws. And therefore, the nature of those laws is simply to regulate, right? Congress will want to pass laws when there's a need to regulate what's happening in society. But Jewish law, God's law, is very different. It creates life. Our sages tell us that God first wrote the Torah, then created the world. Chronologically, 6 days of creation happened after God already wrote the whole Torah. So all of civil law was written before even any humans were created. God is creating life here. God's creating a model. What do I want from human beings? And therefore, it's not there just to regulate society. God is there shaping society. And this answers a lot over here why secular law is only studied by legal professionals. Jewish law is studied by all members of the society. And this is the idea. This is what we're doing over here today. Okay, with this, let us do a little video for today. We'll do a video, and then we will jump into today's specific topic. So till now was a general course introduction. I want you to get the idea and the philosophy and the concept of what we're here to do in this course. And my point here is to impress upon you, we're not just here to study law, which is either fascinating or boring. You'll tell me later if you think the class is intellectually stimulating or not. But as you said, we're here to learn attitudes. We're here to really dig down to what's driving Jewish law, what's driving the thinking. Okay, here we go. Here's our video.
If God created the universe in 6 days, It certainly did not take 40 days for God to hand Moses 2 stone tablets. So what was Moses doing up there all that time? He was internalizing a vast body of instruction to transmit to his people. So once the smoke and sounds of Sinai subsided, Moses began to teach, and the Jews were most surprised. They'd expected Moses to begin with a detailed series of highly spiritual rituals or meditations, matters that Moses had to go up to heaven to receive. Instead, Moses first launched into topics far closer to earth than to heaven. He rolled out a unique civil system with requirements unlike any other. Here are a handful of surprising examples. The finder of a lost item must proactively collect or secure the item, and then preserve it while actively seeking its rightful owner. Beyond banning defamation, the Torah even forbids gossip among friends. It requires an individual not only to rescue those being harmed, but to act preemptively. It makes it illegal to look the other way when a fellow traveler is hopelessly stuck along the roadside. It mandates respect for the elderly. It criminalizes the malicious delivery of bad advice. It illegalizes the verbal abuse of individuals whose disabilities prevent them from recognizing the abuse. But surely the Jews challenged Moses. God prefers spiritual worship instead of looking out for stranded traders and fallen bracelets. Ah, replied Moses, I will soon instruct you in Judaism's rituals and festivals, but you must know that these civil laws are also spiritual. You see, God's goal is not for you to transcend the earth, but to change it and make it more heavenly. You will notice that the Torah's legislation is more than a guide to protecting rights and maintaining social order. No, these laws include mechanisms for molding a righteous civilization. From now on, each of you is legally obligated to do the right thing for those around you, and to proactively extend yourself in the pursuit of good and righteous conduct. With that, Moses and the Jews launched into a spirited study of Jewish civil practice and its aspirations of a righteous society, a study that flourishes until today.
So here we have the basic idea of Judaism, and we see that Judaism, Jewish law, is not just another set of civil laws, but it's an entirely different model of how to look at any given situation. American law is looking at what is within your rights, what's not within your rights. Judaism is asking what is the right thing to do, what is not the right thing to do. With this in mind, now that we understand these two paradigms, let's go, and I want to discuss a few case studies with you, all right? How are we doing with time? We're doing very good with time. Let's do a few case studies, and let's discuss them a little bit, and then we'll start studying some Talmud, some Jewish civil law, trying to get down to some principles, and we'll try to see how Judaism deals with these cases. So let's do this, one at a time. Case study A, it's in your books on page 8, and I'll tell you the story outside, and I actually sent out an email that featured this story. So this is an actual case study. Some of these case studies are just theoretical, some are actual history. This is history. Okay, there's a guy in the year 1848. His name is Nicholas Young. He's a German immigrant. He comes to the promised land of America, makes some money, and buys the house on the upper part of San Francisco, beautiful view, very hilly area of San Francisco, and he has this nice little college. Comes around the guy, his name is Charles Crocker. Charles Crocker is a very, very wealthy man of the time. Says he's one of the big four barons behind the building of the Central Pacific Railroad. And it's the 1870s, and he's looking for him and his cronies. He wants to build these massive mansions. So he goes to San Francisco and tries looking for the best area to buy out all the property and to build these massive mansions. And he comes to the street where Nicholas Young, right, the German immigrant, has a house. And he shows up and he buys every piece of land. And he pays well. Charles Crocker. Nicholas Young says, I like my house. I'm not selling you my property. I'm not moving. I'm very happy where my family and I, where we were living. Charles Crocker has the money and the arrogance. He has the money to back his arrogance. So what does he do? So you can look here in the picture. So he builds a mansion for General David Colton, okay, the Huntington Mansion. He builds a mansion for himself, Charles Crocker Mansion. And what he does is on his property, builds a 3-sided 40-foot wooden fence. Right, you see the arrow that's pointing to the spite fence that fully surrounds Nicholas Young's little piece of land and his house. And Nicholas Young now has no sunlight, no breeze, no view, no nothing. Spite fence. This means the whole purpose of this fence is just to harass Nicholas Young. No data, right, this is not a utilitarian fence, right? But again, he didn't build this fence on Nicholas Young's property. He built it on his property. He owns this land. So, question for all of you. Should Charles Crocker's fence be legally allowed to stand? If Nicholas Young sues Charles Crocker in court, what do you think? Should we say, Charles Crocker, you have to tear down your fence, or do we say he has to keep it?
Majority, so we should assume from your question, from the context of this lesson, it is not against law to do, according to the books, the law, right now, to build a fence like that.
Which means secular law.
Secular law, yeah.
Right, which means very simplistic, and of course there's a lot of building codes.
Right.
But very simplistically speaking, if it's your property, you get to do what you want.
That's what the law was. That's
Yeah,
secular law.
and back then the law was
That's
that.
the
We
assumption,
certainly
right?
couldn't build that in our yard.
You certainly could or
We
can't.
could not.
We cannot.
But there was no law that, so we're not.
But back then, there weren't these regulations. It was even before the San Francisco earthquake. Right, so back then, Nicholas Young actually tried suing Charles Crocker. And the law was, it's within his rights. He has property. He can do what he wants in his property. If he decides to put up a 40-foot fence on his property, it's within his rights. What do you think Judaism would rule on that?
No.
Why not? It's within his rights.
It's not conducive to a good.
Oh, this is no, right? If we're gonna ask what's within your rights, okay, that's one. If we're gonna ask what's the right thing to do, there's no way a spite fence. Okay.
Right, but the point is, it's really just logical equivalence. You don't have a right, even a legal right, we'll say, to do something that, even if it's not specifically proscribed, it's driven by spite.
Right. Oh,
And that is essentially really we can call that a written law. Whatever else is in here, there are tons of laws that are overarching and don't specifically apply to things, but cause for wide-ranging exceptions.
oh,
There's an
right.
exception here. Don't
Right.
do something for spite.
Don't do it just for spite.
Right.
And by the way, even in American law, now many states, I don't know how many, we could look it up. I do know that many states have laws against spite fences, specifically because of this. This became like the model spite fence case, and many laws, even though you're saying it's within your rights, but it's too much. You're literally destroying another person's property you can't do that.
As I think Stuart was getting at, there's also laws that you can't pollute the stream so that it affects somebody who's downriver from
Oh,
you.
that's right.
It's kind of the same idea here. You're blocking his sunlight, you're blocking the things that are necessary for his health. Those aren't always written. Some of the nuisance laws and trespass and some of those kind of things where you pollute.
You're saying even if in American law it's not written, it will still be.
There's a more overarching law written somewhere that allows you, for instance, that's one analysis. Next, another one would be, for instance, there's a thing in the criminal law, which I don't remember practice, but I remember going back third of a century ago, or more, 40 years ago, excuse me, is that there's a rule saying that unless you are committing physical harm, you have a right to break a criminal law and get away with it if it's necessary or if you're under duress. So that's an overarching principle written in the law that doesn't specifically say in every other statute you can steal from somebody unless it's under duress,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right.
So
Okay,
it's an overarching rule.
right. Okay. Let's move on to case. So let's keep this open. We're gonna get back to this case study, but this is the first one, right? Can Charles Crocker, could this fence remain standing? Case study B. Here's the case, and it's in your books on page 11. Rachel has a large and beautiful flower bed on her property. Comes her neighbor Joe, and builds a fence. And the fence is a tall, high wooden fence. And now all of her flowers are are in darkness. So she goes over and says, I want to know if we could put, she says, so why'd you put up this fence? So the way it's here in the book is that Joe says, I have birds and cats are coming to my property and eating and catching my birds. And you put up a fence to keep cats out. She says, I'm all for protecting your birds, but my flowers are getting destroyed. Would you mind if we put up a glass fence, a glass screen in between our property, and whatever the difference in cost is, I'll pay. It's like that. Sound like it's still coming. Joe says no. Joe refuses. He doesn't give any reason. Joe says, I want to put up a wooden fence. I don't want no glass screens. So the question here is, should Joe be legally required? Could we compel Joe to allow Rachel to replace his wooden fence with a glass screen? Could we force that? Could we force Joe to change his plans because it's hurting Rachel's flowers? I'll give you another scenario which is similar to this, okay? And this is a scenario I was thinking of when I was preparing for this class, because this is what I had when I was a kid. When I was a kid, our backyard was open to our neighbor's property. So it felt very wide. One day I remember we came back from school and they're putting up this big wooden fence. And now all of a sudden our backyard looks so small and claustrophobic and sekvetched. And we didn't like it. So I want you to imagine a scenario. Your neighbor puts up a fence and it's just this thick wooden fence. And now all of a sudden it just, your whole backyard lost its beauty. So you walk over to your neighbor and say, you know what, I want to ask you a little favor. Instead, you want a fence up. Let's say he owns a dog, he wants a fence, okay? Do you mind, and I'll pay the difference, we'll put up a nice metal fence with just metal bars, and it's not this thick thing that just makes a block, and it's much nicer. Let's put that up, and I'll pay the difference. And your neighbor says no. Oh. You say, why not? And he says, there's no reason why not. I put up a fence, and I don't want anybody else telling me what the fence to put up, what not to do, what to do. I just say no. Legally, could we force my neighbor to change his fence because I want it changed? What do you say?
Probably not.
No.
Probably not. Which means, and what's the logic of that?
It's his property, it's not, the Rachel Joe example's a little different because it's damaging something on her property.
Oh, okay.
In your situation, it's damaging something, but it's purely aesthetic.
Right, it's purely just looks and feelings versus something concrete.
Versus something concrete.
So you're right, so her case, she has flowers that are getting damaged. So you could say, okay, so put your flowers somewhere else. You just move.
Yeah,
just make a flower bed on the other side.
But you're saying then that his use of the property gets to dictate her use of the property, and that doesn't feel right.
Right, so are you saying in both cases, no, or?
In the Rachel Joe case, I think it's a lot closer because all of a sudden something he's doing is damaging her property rights.
So no or yes, could we force Joe to change the fence?
The answer is probably no.
No in American law.
It's probably a close.
But it's more of a challenge.
Yeah.
What do you say? What do we say? Does it make sense? Should we be allowed to force Joe to change the fence if Rachel wants to change for her flowers? Anybody on Zoom? What do you say? What do you vote? I'm getting mostly no's, right? What about Jewish law? Would Jewish law say we could force Joe to change his fence? You're saying, oh, come on, it's his fence, his property, let him do what he wants.
You might say, I think a wooden fence looks a lot nicer than and you think flowers look nicer.
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. I happen to like this and just whatever.
You like flowers.
I don't need to explain to you my things. If I decide to paint my house purple, I don't need to now come and explain to you why I did that. I get to do what I want on my property as long as it's not
No, it's actually says, I think wood looks better than glass, and you think flowers look better than a lawn. So
right. So it's my taste versus your taste. Yeah. Okay. Let's do the next case study. Case study C, page 11. You move into a new house and you realize your neighbor has open Wi-Fi. You can say, no, I can pay myself a Comcast bill every month. I don't need to pay Comcast. I have my neighbor's free Wi-Fi. Or let's change the scenario. It's a business, not your neighbor. You're right next door to a business. It's not Starbucks, which officially has public Wi-Fi. It's just a private business Lipson, Nielsen, whatever, okay? And they happen to have open Wi-Fi, and you're like, you know what? I don't need to get Wi-Fi. I could just join their free network, and I could piggyback on that. Is it allowed or not? No. Anyone else? What do you say? Could you piggyback on somebody else's open Wi-Fi?
It's the without their knowledge part that does it for me.
Oh, if you get permission, you could always.
Oh, okay, no, exactly. Permission is easy.
Right.
Permission's yes, yes, no, no. But we're just saying without knowledge. You say no. What about in Jewish law? Any difference?
It's
Also
not
no.
the right, it's not the right thing.
It's not the right thing. You're saying, why are you going and just taking somebody else? Right? Case study D. Case study D. And case study D, here in Michigan, we don't appreciate this concept. But if you'll go in New York, this is a very touchy subject, okay? In New York, you could spend $1.25 million, $1.2, $1.3 million buying a home, and it won't even come with a single parking space. It's unbelievable. And some people will, and in New York, like, in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, the
I still think you should notify your neighbor.
the property is so narrow, and you have just a tiny little yard, and some people take the little yard that they have and they make one tiny parking spot just for their one van, just like that they have. Okay, so here's the scenario, case study D. Your neighbor's on vacation for a month. They went to the country for the summer. They have an open parking spot. You say, why do I need to worry and start parking? And they come and clean the streets, and you start moving your car. You know what I'm talking about? I don't know if, and here in the Midwest, we don't even begin to know these problems. In New York, you have to go 2 days a week. You got to move your car to the other side of the street. You got to find the parking spot. You're gonna get a ticket. You get it towed. My neighbor has an open parking spot. Let me just go and park on his driveway. And I know he's not using it. Let me just go park there.
But you also don't know what your neighbor may have lined up for the.
Oh, first of all, you don't know. Maybe your neighbor is coming into town today.
Or-
He's gonna show up, and all of a sudden, there's some random car there.
Or has a contractor, or told somebody else they could use it.
Right.
Or,
So let's say it's not regularly. I'm not gonna park there for. But one day, I need a park. There's nowhere for me to park. Big deal. I'll just park. And I know from precedence, no one's showing up in here. This place is empty the past few weeks. I'll just park here one day. Is that legally? Should I be allowed to park there without advance permission? Of course, I get permission. That's of course not even a question. So we're getting no's. Or anybody for yes?
Yeah.
Unless it's an emergency.
Oh, if it's an emergency, I understand. If it's an emergency, you can park by a pump. You should know my grandfather. He was a Russian Jew, he was a very spirited guy, big personality, but he was a very rough person. He was like, he was a my way or the highway type of guy, my great grandfather. He was known to be like that. So he says, everything's a parking spot. Just only difference of price. Everything's a parking spot. You could park everywhere. Just depends. You're gonna pay $2. You're gonna pay $100 for your ticket. But everything's a parking spot. Anyways, okay.
I think the answer is yes.
In Jewish law?
Yeah.
Ooh, I think this is our first yes, by the way. In Jewish law, Max is proposing that maybe yes. Why?
Well, in part because a rabbi used to work in a law office.
Oh, okay.
Told me that if somebody can do something, it's no harm to you, but it's a benefit to them, you can't stop them, essentially, or you can't say no to a request.
It's a benefit from somebody else.
But there's no
And-
request.
Well, that's a lot of these problems seem to be from a lack of communication rather than any real issue.
Right. You have to also realize that.
Problems seem to be.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, that's it. Good point.
But
I think he should ask the neighbor.
Okay, so we're not. Okay, right.
No,
So
because,
of course, asking.
No,
He's
because the
understandable.
argument is that if he doesn't know when the
So
neighbor is
Elke,
coming,
here's a scenario.
Yeah.
Where it's 200 years ago, and there's no phones, and there's no nothing, and my neighbor is out of the country, and he's traveling on a business trip, and I could use something from his property,
no.
like a parking spot. I have no way to contact him. The guy's on a business trip somewhere else on the globe. He can't contact me, right? This before any ways of communication. Is it within my
No.
legal rights to
No,
go?
you put your neighbor in, and no matter what you use from him, you put him in the situation that he will have to ask to use his property or stuff or whatever it is you want to use from him, because when he comes back and needs it, and then you park there, then he is the one who has to beg you to make room for his space.
Right.
That cannot be
Right, if he comes back unexpectedly, then all of a sudden you're a nuisance to him. Okay, so we have 4 case studies here. This is the idea. We have 4 case studies, and I think in American law, all 4 of these cases are very, very simple. It's a big no to all of them. In American law, it's very straightforward. It's not within your rights. Your neighbor Joe can put up whatever fence he wants. He has spike fence, depending on the state and the modern age, and maybe not, even though it's within your rights, but it's like a little bit too much. Okay, it's an egregious, breach of somebody else's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Okay, but all the other cases, you want to force your neighbor to change his fence? No. Want to use your neighbor's Wi-Fi without their permission? No. You want to use somebody else's property? You want to use the parking space? No. But here's another, okay, right? But let's look at what Judaism has to say. Okay. So the Talmud discusses cases like this. Here's the interesting thing. If you look in the actual Torah, the 613 commandments, you won't actually see these scenarios being discussed. There's no law about fences. I want one fence, you want another fence. There's no law. Parking space, Wi-Fi. A lot of these scenarios, right, you could come with millions of different types of scenarios, and the Torah is a limited amount of law. 613 at the end of the day is a limited number. So what do? So a lot of the Talmud is trying to not just tell us what the law is, but trying to deduce what would the Torah tell us in this situation. Which means if you look at all of Judaism's civil laws, what would be the principles, and how can we apply those principles in other cases which would be similar and comparable? And specifically, I want to point this out to you. I want you to look back to text 3 on page 6. This is one verse in the Torah. But our sages look at this verse and they see something very, very interesting. And I want you to take a look at it. This is the verse, right? Diligently observe God's commandments that he has commanded you, period. Do what is right and good in God's eyes. Every word in the Torah is precise. This verse is really 2 different clauses. Our sages point this out. 1, observe commandments. 2, do what is right and good. So it's like 2 separate things. God is really telling us in this verse 2 separate commandments. 1 is obey whatever I've told you, and 2 is do what is right and good. And the sages learn out from this that God is asking us here, don't just follow my mitzvahs, get in touch with what God has in mind for you and do what is right and good even when it's not a commandment. Like get in touch with the spirit of the law and apply it even when there's no overt law. It's called getting in touch with the spirit of the law. Sometimes you could follow all the laws, you totally lose touch with what's really happening over here. Like here's a story. Want to hear a story? Here's a story. In old shtetl stories, in old Jewish stereotypes, every town has a miser. The rich guy is a miser. That's a very big stereotype in Jewish stories. So the story goes, there's a miser, and everybody knows he doesn't give any charity. He hates poor people. He says, what is this? I have to support people. Go get a job, right? I need to support people. So anybody would come, he would ship them out. I'm not giving you any money, not giving you any food. And back then, there was no safety nets, there's no welfare programs. If you were poor, you could literally die. You could literally die in the streets. You should know it's a Jewish tradition. Maybe it's even in Jewish law. I don't know. In a synagogue, you have 24/7 refreshments, and coffee and tea. Simply, there's no Jew that should ever not have food. You go to the synagogue, you'll get food. If you go to New York, any synagogue you walk into, not the small ones, but like any big city synagogue, every bakery leaves whatever they don't sell. So Dunkin' Donuts just throws in the garbage. In Jewish communities, you bring it to the local synagogue, and there's a lot of people. There's a lot of, in big cities, in the big city, you have a lot of needy people. They come to the synagogue, they have food, they have danishes and coffee and drink, anything. Sandwiches, like all the supermarkets. At the end of the day, you have ready-made sandwiches, you have extra sushi, you have extra salads, pre-packed. All goes into the synagogue, and people eat it. So this is a story. There's a pauper, shows up to the misers, and he's literally starving. He's out of energy. He knocks on the miser's door, and the miser sends him flying. I'm not giving you any food. I'm not giving you any money. He says, I'm starving. Just give me leftover from dinner that you're throwing out anyways. Give me something. So the pauper callously gives him a rotten piece of fish. a week-old piece of fish. Here's an old piece of fish you could eat. The pauper's so hungry that he eats a piece of fish. And so, an old piece of fish, so he gets sick. And this miser who's a religious Jew, he says, oh, there's a Jew in town who's sick. I'm going to do the mitzvah of Bikar Cholim, visiting the sick. So he goes to pay a visit to the sick guy. And the sick guy, ultimately, he got poisoned. He dies from the fish. So the miser says, oh, it's a mitzvah to go to funerals. I'm going to the funeral. So he goes to the funeral. And then there's a family sitting Shiva. So he says, oh, it's a mitzvah to go pay a Shiva visit. So he goes to Shiva visit. He comes home, this rich man from the Shiva visit, he tells his wife, what? This is unbelievable. I'll tell you, I got to use the Yiddish word. One verstunk in a piece of fish, one rotten, smelly piece of fish, and I got 4 mitzvahs. I gave somebody food, I visited the sick, I went to the funeral. So it's a joke, but what's the idea of the joke? That sometimes you could be doing mitzvahs. You missed the point. You're totally out of touch with what God wants from you. And that's the sages see over here. There's, first of all, observe the commandments, and then number 2, get in touch with what is right and good. So a lot of what's happening in the Talmud is, what our sages do is, they're trying to understand what is the righteousness and goodness that God wants from us. And the sages try defining that for us, giving us principles to work with. And many of these principles, they legislated into law. Which means even though it's not in the 613 commandments that you have to do this in this situation, the sages said, we're going to legislate it based on this verse. Not just follow the commandments, do what is right and good. And I want to read that with you in this text, this idea. Text 5, page 13, from the great Nachmanides, from his commentary on this verse. So, Alan, take it away.
The spirit of the law. Our sages expounded on this verse and explained that it instructs us to go beyond the letter of the law. In other words, the Torah first exhorts us to observe all of God's commandments, and it now instructs us to be careful to do that which is right and good, even when not explicitly commanded to do so, because God cherishes good and proper conduct. This instruction is very important because it would be impossible for the Torah to exhaustively address all of our conduct with our friends and neighbors, all our business affairs, all the welfare of society in the world. Instead, after offering multiple specific commandments, such as, you shall not go about as a gossip monger, do not take revenge or bear a grudge, do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood, do not curse even a deaf person, and stand in the presence of the aged. The Torah then concludes with a generalized command to do that which is right and good, meaning to go beyond the letter of the law.
Right? Figure out even beyond the commandments, what is the right thing to do and do with them. So our sages, as I mentioned, work very hard on trying to distill what is the righteousness and goodness that the Torah is referring to here, and to kind of give us an understanding, a definition, principles to walk with. And by the way, each of these 6 classes are based on this verse. Principles, Jewish principles that the sages have kind of identified are the core principles of what is right and good in God's eyes that we should adhere to. And here's one. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so going through one for today, and each of the following classes is going to go through another one. Here we go. Text 6 from the Talmud, Bava Batra. I don't have time, but there's a very good line I can tell you right now. I'll just tell it to you quickly. In the Mendel Bayless trial, without going into the whole history of it, a bit over 100 years ago, there was a very big anti-Semitic trial against a Jew. His name was Mendel Bayless. And it became not just like a blood libel. It wasn't just against Mendel Bayless as the private citizen. It was an attack on Jews and Jewish beliefs. So they put up the prosecutors put up a professional in Jewish law and in Jewish culture. So he gave his testimony, and then the defendants, on behalf of Mendel Bayless, cross-examined him. So the lawyer for Mendel Bayless said something brilliant. This was in Russia. He asked this professional of Judaism, he says, who was Bava Batra and where did she live? And the professional didn't know. And all the Jews burst out laughing. It was a trick question. Bava Batra is not a person, it's a tractate of Talmud. but it sounds like Baba, which in Russian means grandma, right? So who is Baba Batra, and where did she live? And if you don't know the answer to that, his whole testimony fell apart. 'Cause what do you know about Judaism if that question tricks you? Anyways, that's the story about Baba Batra. So here is a line from Baba Batra. Max, you want to read? I'll give you another text also. This is the key principle.
A person is compelled by law not to act in a manner characteristic of the inhabitants of Sodom.
Sodom, biblical town. In the times of Abraham, there were twin cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and which are really 5 cities. And the place where it used to stand is still in Israel. The tour guides will point out exactly where it is. And in the Torah tells us that these towns were the paragon of cruelty. Sodom is synonymous with cruelty. And the Talmud says, anything which is characteristic of the people of Sodom, Jewish law compels you that you're not allowed to act that way. Which means you can get sued and the court will enforce that you should not act that way. Or in other words, this is a legislation in Jewish law against acting cruelly. Okay. The problem is that cruelty is a very subjective term. What you think is cruel, somebody else doesn't think is cruel. So how do we define what cruelty is? Or in other words, what exactly is the behavior of the people of Sodom? Let's put this up over here, right? What is Sodom-like character? So let's read this in text 7a. So this here in the Ethics of Our Fathers gives us a bit of an understanding of what it is. But the problem with this text is it opens up another can of worms. Okay, which means we have to discuss this.
One who insists what is mine and what is yours is of average character. However, another opinion maintains that such an attitude is characteristic of the wicked people of Sodom.
Okay, really weird. First of all, what is mine, what is yours. Does that sound too bad? Too diabolical? This laptop is mine, your laptop is yours. Is that controversial? It sounds like a very powerful statement, right? That's okay, you know? One opinion in the Mishnah says, this is average, that we like, right? Average, no problem. And one opinion says this is characteristic of the wicked people of Sodom. This is wicked. What's mine, what's yours is yours, that's wickedness. So we have 2 questions over here. Number 1, what in the world could be the problem with saying what's mine, what's yours is yours? That's cruelty. Is that the Jewish definition of cruelty? What's mine, what's yours is yours? But number 2, this is so weird. These 2 opinions are not like nuanced opinions. They're miles apart. One says average, you're a good guy, this is normal. One says this is cruel. Which one is it? So what's the meaning of this? So the way our sages understand this is like this. It depends. It depends like this. If you maintain the attitude that what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, and I get to keep what's mine, and I don't want to share with you what's mine. In a case where I will lose by sharing it with you, it comes at an expense, it comes at a loss, that's average. That's average. So for example, if I tell somebody, it's my house, I understand you need somewhere to live, but if I give you 2 rooms in my house, I lose 2 rooms. So if I say what's mine is mine and my house is not your house, in a case where I am going to lose, that's okay. That's average. But if somebody says what's mine, what's yours is yours, I don't want to share with you what I've got, and it's not going to hurt me, I'm not losing anything. It's not going to be at any personal expense, and you still maintain your rights and say it's within my rights. I'm not sharing with you. I'm not gonna. That's cruel. So the definition of cruelty, according to Judaism, is when somebody else could benefit and you won't lose, and you're still not willing to share. You're still not willing to change when you have nothing to lose and they have everything to gain. So this is a legal rule. This is a very big rule because we now have to start applying it and seeing, to what extent. But this is breaking the model of rights. I'm not saying, right? Even within it, sometimes you could be within your rights and you'll be, according to Judaism, acting cruelly. Let's read this in text 7b, page 16. Toby, we're back at you.
Both statements in the Mishnah are valid because the second view, which classifies such conduct as wicked, refers to those who refuse to permit others to benefit from them, even when they will incur no personal or monetary expense as a result. Such conduct is characteristic of the inhabitants of Sodom. By contrast, the first view in the Mishnah, which classifies such conduct as average, refers to those who refuse to allow others to benefit from them when doing so would come at a personal or monetary expense. Individuals who adopt this approach cannot be compared to the inhabitants of Sodom because they seek simply to avoid incurring losses through the action of others, just as they would not inflict a loss upon their fellow. This indeed reflects the average character.
Here you have it. Okay, let's start applying this law. So we have a principle here. We have a principle that if you could be of benefit to somebody else at no loss to yourself, if you hold on to your rights, say, no, I'm not sharing, I don't want to give, that is cruel. Okay. You have to realize, we can all get behind this as an ethical principle. I'm sure you
So
also,
that's how you see it.
right, I'm sure
Personal.
even in American society, if I tell us an American, do you like this value that if you could share with somebody and you won't lose, you should, they'll say, yeah, of course, I'm all behind that. You have to realize in Judaism, this is not recommended. This is not values, this is law. Law. The law says if you want to act this way, illegal. We're going to compel you to not act this way. So let's do an example. You ready for an example? Yeah. And the example, I think, will already start pushing back on our default way of looking at things. Here's the example. We're going to read it soon inside Maimonides from his Code of Jewish Law. By the way, random fact. I just read something so fascinating. We have the fingerprints of Maimonides.
What?
You know that? Why? Because we have a 30-page letter they found in the Cairo Geniza. Unbelievable story. We're not going to talk about it now. And it's clearly the Maimonides handwriting. We know his handwriting. And a tremendous amount of his archives are in the Cairo Geniza.
Wow.
And what we have there is a fingerprint, a smudge. And it's very clear that it's his. So we literally have Maimonides' fingerprints. We don't only have his writing, we have his fingerprints. Just quite unbelievable. Okay, so we're going to be reading this from Maimonides in a moment. Okay.
Rabbi.
Random Jewish fun fact. Yes, Ellen.
Rabbi, isn't a lot of this undergirded by the fact that in Judaism, God owns everything? In other words, yes, we say it's my land, but since God created everything, it's sort of on loan from God.
Okay, that's
So
a fair point.
It is our land for use, but only if we are using it in accordance with, how God would use it.
So I'll tell
Because
you,
God
Ellen. So this is we have actually a full lesson about ownership. So we're going to be covering what you're talking about in the full class. I believe it's lesson 4 or lesson 5 of this course, all about ownership. Lesson 5 about lawful ownership. But over here, we're not even going there. Just very, very simply. You own a piece of land, very conventionally, right? You own land, you own something, you own property, you own a house, you own stuff. If you have something to share with somebody else, and it's not just sharing. Well, here's a scenario. You ready? Here's my Maimonides scenario. I have a house, and I have a window in my house. Okay, today we have windows, and they're very nice. They bring in natural sunlight, and they give us a view. But they're not close to as critical as they were before electricity. Back in the day, your window was literally your whole light. It was very, very critical, which is why, according to Jewish law, you are not allowed to build a fence or a house that's going to block somebody else's primary source of light. You have to imagine you're living in ancient Israel, and you have a window to your house. That's a very valuable window. But in general, back in the day, like this type of weather, like this type of time of day, it's getting dark out. You're about to go to bed. Everybody went to sleep when it gets dark because there's no light. People couldn't afford candles. So and daylight was very important in a house. So here's the scenario. My neighbor's building a home right next to my home. The problem is, it's very clear. The sun comes up here, he's building a house, he's blocking my sunlight. So I go to my neighbor and say, I think you got to abort your project. You're going to be blocking my window. My neighbor says, you know what? I have a good idea. Your window is on the lower portion of your house. If we move your window up higher, then my house will not actually be hurting your sunlight and it'll be just fine. He says, look, I anyways got the contractors here. I'll take care of the whole thing. You won't even know it happened. I'll close up your old window. I'll put in a new window, top quality, higher up, and it will have the same effect. It's like that. I have my house and you have your sunlight and we're all good. He says, you won't even know what happened. You'll go to work. By the time you come back, your new window's in place. That's his plan. Can I object to that plan? So I'm out of these cases. Let's read. Okay? Steve, you want to read? Text 8, page 18.
Yes. A person has windows set in the lower portion of the wall of his house, and his neighbor desires to erect a building that would block them. The neighbor proposes to solve the problem by installing new windows in the upper portion of the homeowner's wall. If this arrangement won't cause the homeowner any difficulty at all, it would not require him to leave his home during the construction, he cannot prevent the new neighbor from performing this construction. The homeowner is compelled by law to allow the neighbor to close the windows on the bottom part of this wall and create new windows higher up. This is because it would be Sodom-like conduct for the homeowner to refuse this accommodation. This principle applies to every situation in which one individual will benefit while his fellow will not lose anything as a result. In all such cases, the relevant party is compelled by law to cooperate.
It's a very powerful idea. Okay, I just want you to imagine this. I have a home, I have a window, I'm very happy with my property. Max is building a house right next to me. And Max, which is a very sweet guy and a very considerate guy, comes and says, Levi, don't worry about it. I'm gonna take care of the expenses. I'm gonna build you, we're gonna move your window at no personal cost, no personal loss. You won't have to leave your house for a week in order to have that happen. And it's like that, we both win. I get my house, you didn't lose your sunlight.
I don't like it.
If I say, this is Jewish law, I know, I told you we're gonna stretch we're gonna push our consent. Here we go. Maimonides says, unless I can come with a solid argument why moving the window is gonna hurt me, I'm gonna lose out of something, and I can present that to the court will compel me to listen and let Max change my window so that he could build his house. Why?
Why?
Because he's gonna benefit, I lose nothing. I don't have the right to object in such a case. Well, because that is the definition of cruelty in Judaism. If I would tell Max, I'm sorry, I like my window, I don't need to explain to you anything, don't build your house. That is Sodom-like character.
This may be beside the point, but I think you're losing plenty.
Oh, okay, no. If you can demonstrate, if you could argue, and by the way, Jewish law does not make you have to it doesn't make it very difficult to argue this. You need to come with a reasonable argument to say why you're losing out. Now, if you have that, then Jewish law would go to Max, say, Max, actually now we have a reason, she has a reason to push back. Maybe Max can come and say, well, I have a counter offer. So for example, let's say you say, I don't just use the window for light. I use it as a shelf. If it's high up, it's not gonna be a shelf. Max will say, well, I'll build you a stone shelf in your thing. So the point is, so to Alan's point, right? The key here is you're not losing anything. If you're losing something and you could demonstrate that to the court, then it's within your rights. But if it's a case where you're just kind of digging your heels and saying, no, it's my rights, I don't want to let you do it, then we say, no. We force you, which is it's shocking. This is pushing upon what we think is right and wrong.
Maybe because this example gives such an obvious reason for why it hurts the original.
So what's your reason?
I can't see out the window when it's up high. I can't look to see who's coming to my home to protect myself.
Okay.
I don't have light where I need it.
So these are good arguments. These are very good arguments. So these would be valid arguments. I'm not saying.
Not this case.
So again, it's theoretical. Imagine a case where there is actually no concern. Any concern you bring up, or let's say you have another window. This is actually not the window where you see anybody coming in. I'm just saying, on the other side of the house, that's where you have. So the point is, if there's a case where you are losing nothing and Max has everything to gain, you have nothing to lose, and you cannot demonstrate that this is coming at any personal loss or any personal expense, that is where Jewish law would come in and say, we're going to force you. So let's start going to some case studies. Charles Crocker's spike fence. Would Jewish law ever allow that?
No.
No way. No way, right? This has no purpose. It's lose-lose. You're literally just trying to hurt somebody. Jewish law would say, I'll tell you even something interesting. You will not find Jewish law ever discussing the laws of a spike fence. Doesn't even discuss it, of the spike fence. Why? It's so obviously immorally wrong and illegal that it's not even discussed. Okay, but let's now talk about the case of Rachel and Joe, and she has flowers and she wants to change the fence. According to Jewish law, could we force Joe to change the fence?
I think so.
Do you think so? You're saying, no, 1 second. Here's the argument. Here's the argument. Joe will still have his fence, and Rachel will gain because now her flowers are not going to die. And Joe presented why he needs a fence, and her proposal is going to solve that issue, unless he can show the court. And again, this is Jewish law. This is not American law. So, by the way, just to state the obvious, when we live in America, the common assumption is we all follow American law. I can't impose upon my neighbor Jewish. I'm Jewish. I follow Jewish law. No. Right? In Judaism and Jewish law, we follow the law of the land. But if you were living in ancient Israel, where the law of the land was halacha, this would be the law. According to Jewish law, yeah, Rachel would be able to sue Joe, bring him to a din Torah, a hearing in a Jewish court, and enforce that. Again, because for Joe to just say, I don't want to change it, that Judaism sees that as a Sodom-like character way of, okay. I want to conclude today's class. We have 5 minutes left. We're not going to be able to go into this in proper depth, but we have this principle of Judaism. If I gain and you lose nothing, you cannot stop me. That's basically but the problem with this principle is the very strong lines of my rights, not my rights, my property, those strong lines fade away. And the question is, how far does this law go by? And the question is, does this law even let squatters squat? Here's an example. Maybe 2 examples right now. You ready? I work in an office, and I work in this tiny little cubicle, and it's claustrophobic, and I have no desk space. And my coworker has a beautiful closed office, and she leaves for 3 months. You know, it's COVID. Everybody's going to Florida. She goes to Florida for 3 months. She's working remotely. And I say, hey, my coworker left. She has this beautiful office. She's not using it. I'm moving in. You got nothing to lose. You left. I have everything to gain. Now, is Judaism letting me do that? Is this law letting me do that if my coworker can't argue why she is clearly losing something by me moving into her office? I could tell her, you're not even in town. The second you come back, it's going to be clean and beautiful. And, look, your whole desk is cleared anyways. Everything's locked in your cabinets. There's nothing happening over here.
Are you asking her, is the question.
Does Jewish law say you have to ask? I'm moving in. Or here's something else.
I'm building the windows on your house. I didn't ask.
So that you have to ask. But over here, I'm using your property. Or here's another example. Imagine this. Let's say I own a home, and I usually rent out this home. Okay, I own a home in Michigan, but I don't. But this is a theoretical case. I own a home in Michigan which I rent out. I actually decided, my last tenant moved out, and I decided I'm not putting it up for rent. I'm renovating the home before renting it out again. And right now, my home, I submitted plans to the township, and I'm waiting a few weeks until I get permission. Meanwhile, there's a nice Jewish family that just recently, had to move out of their old apartment. And they say, look, Levi has a home. It's not up for rent. He's not using it anyways. And he's anyways renovating it. Let's squat. Let's go in. I hear that this family just squatted in my home. I go knock on the door and say, what are you doing in my house? And they say, we're benefiting, you're not losing. You're not renting it anyways. There's no wear and tear problem because you're renovating it. And according to Jewish law, by the way, there's no squatter's rights. Jewish law, the second you want a squatter out, he leaves that day. There's no, you're 6 months and 12 months and all that mishigas that happened here in the States. So this Jewish family can say, we need a home, save us some money, help us out over here. Why not? What's the big deal? You're not renting it anyways. So does this law allow squatting? It's an interesting question. And a lot of people get nervous. All of a sudden you have this law, one benefits, one doesn't lose. Maybe Judaism is even opening the door for full-on squatting and making it legal. And this is where we're seeing that there's a nice Jewish value, and maybe we like the Jewish value, but if we start applying the value too much, what starts happening? It gets us a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm going to tell you outside. I'm going to tell you the conclusion, and then we're going to close today's class. Do you want to know the answer? We can just end the class over here. We have an intellectual exercise or a thought exercise. Here's what Talmud would say. Talmud would say, at the end of the day, we don't let squatting. Squatting is too much. Why? Even though I showed you in these situations, it's coming at no loss of mine. Right? A Jewish family is going to move into my home. I'm renovating it anyways. No one's living there. It's not up for rent. They'll get 3 months of free living space. Why can't they squat? Judaism says, no. If somebody's squatting on your property, you can kick them out whenever you want. Even though you're not renting it, even though it's going to be an empty shell of a house, even though you're anyways renovating it. No loss. Why does Judaism allow that? Because when somebody else is living on your own property, you mentally lose your grip of ownership. It's in your head, but you feel like you own it less. Somebody squatting my property, it's a total infringement on my mental ownership. Right? I own this piece of land. This is my house. And all of a sudden somebody who is not paying me, we don't even have a contract, just living there. And Judaism says that itself, the loss of the mental sense of ownership, is enough that no, that wouldn't be cruel to say, I need you out. Because that would be considered a loss. But here's the case. I want to conclude with this. You gotta go? I want to conclude you with this. Let's say I all of a sudden discover that for the past 3 months, the Greenberg family was living in my property, right? I gave you the scenario. I have a home, it's not up for rent, I'm renovating it anyways, I have no actual loss. And they just move in and they're having 3 months of no rent. And I'm like, hey, 1 second. I show up to them and say, look, Mr. Greenberg, you usually pay rent for your home, right? He says, yes. You just squatted in my property. I actually had no clue because it's, I wasn't. I want back rent. I want back pay. Pay me for the past 3 months and the security deposit. Right? Could I demand that legally? Can I demand back pay? You would say yes. So let's read a piece of Talmud. And we'll conclude the class with this text. And here we'll see another application of the same principle of this ethical principle of Jewish law. Text 9, page 20, where we hold. Did you read just now, the second round around? Steve, did you read? Did you read? Oh, what was that? Steve just read. Okay, then Stuart. Text 9, page 20.
If one lives in his fellow's yard without the landlord's knowledge, does he have to pay him rent or not? The question is in regard to a yard that is not on the market for rent. The squatter is a person who usually rents. What is the law? Can the squatter say to the owner, what loss have I caused you? Or perhaps the owner can insist, look, you have benefited from my property instead of paying rent elsewhere. This is a case in which one individual benefits while the other does not lose anything. The Talmud concludes, Rabbah, the son of Rav Huna, said, my father ruled in the name of Rav, and the squatter does not have to pay rent.
Judaism says you cannot demand back pay. Why? Another family benefited, and it comes at no loss to you.
there's a reward for mendacity, for lying, for not.
No. So Judaism says you could kick the squatter out today. You cannot demand back pay. Demanding back pay would already go into the criteria of that Sodom-like character. You're demanding money when somebody had benefit and it came to no personal expense. It became a personal expense. You need to pay their water bills, and it's totally fine. You say, look, I want to show you. There would have been zero water bill, and now all of a sudden I have $600 of water bills. That, of course, you could bill them for. But to randomly say, I just want $2,000 a month, just pay me money, that you can't do. Now, if you look at the Talmud, I just want to point this out to you. Look at the way the Talmud begins text 9. It says, if one lives in his fellow's yard. The Talmud is talking de facto, right? After the fact. Talmud's not saying that you should go ahead and squat, right? And we see, as I told you, in Judaism, squatting is already outside of this, right? You can't do that. But if one decided to, and then the owner finds out, the owner cannot back charge based on this ethical principle. Jewish law will compel you to not act in a cruel manner of the people of Sodom.
You rewarded someone for unethical behavior by squatting, essentially.
Yeah. You're right. It's a fine line. So dear friends, with this we conclude today's class. And what I want to leave you with is that really, and this is what I want you to reflect upon in the next coming days. There's more text, by the way. We didn't read all the texts. There's definitely a lot more to read over here. And we didn't even begin to scratch the surface of what all the applications of this principle would be. But at least what we did get is this idea that Judaism does force us to think differently and force us to have a little bit of a different standards of ethical thinking. And many times in life we would feel like we want to say no. It's easy to say no. I'm not interested in sharing. I'm not interested in doing. I'm not interested in making space for your needs. And Judaism impresses upon us, no, that's cruel. And it's really a way it's an attitude in life. And we could think a little bit about where in life could we be more flexible in a case where, you know what, somebody else will gain, comes at no loss. If there's no loss, Judaism really obligates us to give in.
Rabbi?
Yes, Elke.
So back to the original or that question we had earlier with the parking space, is that squatting now?
So is parking considered squatting?
Yeah. Or just to clarify, because
so my conclusion, Elke, is going to be that in the case of parking, it's a good question, and I'm not even sure myself what Jewish law would say. Which means like this: is a parking space considered a piece of property that if somebody parks in your parking space, it will feel as if you're losing ownership? If yes, then Judaism would say you can't do it. If no, then Judaism would say yes. It would be a normal thing for somebody else while you're out of town to use your parking space, because why not? And the example of that would be is all of us to turn around goes in somebody else's driveway to turn around our car, right? Yeah, I just turn around. I'll just go in. Go in the. So everybody understands that just taking a quick detour on somebody's thing is not compromising the ownership. What about parking there for a day? So I'm not sure. But Judaism would base it upon what do the majority of people think? Would the majority of people within our society feel that if somebody is parking in my parking lot, they're like infringing on my ownership of my piece of land? So I don't know. So that's the truth. So the case study, I don't have a conclusive answer for the case study, but at least we have what to think about. And dear friends, with that, we conclude today's class. And the journey begins. God willing, we'll see you next week for lesson 2. And by the way, next week, the principle is going to be even more challenging than this week. If this week felt like it was pushing us out of our comfort zone, next week is we're gonna dig in a little bit deeper. But it's good. It's good when that happens. If the class was here just preaching to the choir, then it would be boring. Hey, tell me this. I already know this. I believe this. It's good when we are mentally challenging our status quo. And we're like, okay, I got to think about this. I got to go home and.
Kept me awake.
Kept you awake?
I said I had 3 hours of sleep last night. You kept me awake.
And there's enough suspense.
Thank you.